Welcome back, everyone, and I hope the tea has refreshed all of you for the session on systems change. Systems change in education involves making educational systems innovative, adaptive, and collaborative in nature. It requires transforming existing education systems into dynamic networks of educators who influence the experience of young people, working together to ensure that youth develop the knowledge, skills, and inclinations that are prerequisites to creating a better world. We are excited to hear our esteemed speakers wax eloquent on systems change today. We have three presenters. After a presentation of 20 minutes, we can have a Q&A session. Our rapporteurs will give gentle reminders to the speakers when they have 5 minutes more to go. So please don't mind, sir. Okay, I'll tell them that. One reminder at 10 and one at 15 minutes more to go. So thank you, and we'll start off with our first speaker, that is Mr. Subir Shukla. Mr. Shukla is a former educational quality advisor to the MHRD and has developed the quality framework for the implementation of the Right to Education Act and Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. He is currently the principal coordinator for IGNUS Group and works on a large-scale systematic change in education through advising state and national governments across Asia. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, LFE and Flame, for giving space to dinosaurs. It'll be useful to look at prehistoric aspects as well. Now, what I'm going to speak about, which is how do education systems learn? It is so audacious, outrageously so, that it's difficult to do justice to any bit of it. So if you take me seriously on a number of things, it's at your own peril. I'm going to cover these five broad areas. How did we get where we are? What's been our journey? What things are like? Some of it, we have it in our minds, and some of it is out there. What have we learned after being engaged with the system for 30, 35 years or so? And what do we now need to see, which we might not be looking at? Based on all this, if we now get the opportunity to do something, what would be good ways to apply lessons learned from these last decades? You must have heard this quite frequently. Giving up smoking is very easy. I've done it many times. Likewise, I've changed the system many times. The damn thing doesn't stay changed. That's the problem. So how did we evolve? Starting from 1990, the Jomtien Conference, now I see it in the form of generations of change. Like you have phone system now, 1G, 2G, we are now in 5G. In education reforms, we are in 5G. But the difference is the 1G phone is dramatically different from the 5G one. But the 1G education is not as dramatically different from the 5G education program. In the later 80s, early 90s, we had Operation Blackboard, Andhra Pradesh Primary Education Program, Bihar Education Program, UP Basic Education Program, Lok Jumbish. Some of these you might not have heard of. Lok Jumbish was so big that the King of Sweden came down to see it. Then we had DPEP from mid-1990s, followed by Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, then NCF and RTE were major shifts. And then, of course, Samagra Shiksha, which cut across all stages. And that is also the time when CSR, the NGO sector, came in, and we have 1,000 flowers competing to bloom. And then suddenly by 2020, we are in the midst of learning poverty after 25 years of working on improving education. Maybe it's a teaching crisis, maybe it's a systemic implementation crisis, but the term that is used is learning crisis because it is believed that the problem is in the child. The rest of us are all okay. So typically, and this is across countries, you will find that there's an EFA journey. You will see in the beginning focus on infrastructure. In fact, that is interestingly how when a new CSR organization comes in, also thinks in very similar way. This seems to be the cycle of how people think about education reform. Let's build schools, get children into them, increase enrollment. This is a honeymoon phase because you can get a lot of good photographs, inaugurations are done, some people become very important. But then you slowly realize that children are not staying in school as much. In fact, now in India, boys are dropping out a lot more than girls in secondary. And very quickly, in a matter of 2 years, I give it 3 to 5 years, the euphoria is dampened because you realize that learning is not improving. This is phase 1. Then the phase 2 starts, which is of trying to bring about those things which actually can improve learning. This too seems to have a cycle, which I call the 7 stages of head scratching on educational reform. People believe that curriculum must be outdated, something must be wrong. Let's change the textbooks. When we get that, but it's not being taught well, so pedagogy is really critical. Oh, but then the teachers don't know how to implement it. And then, of course, assessment is not great. We are still assessing the same old way. Let's change assessment. And when all of this doesn't lead to change, then we say we are not monitoring properly. Teachers need to be held accountable. We need frameworks for monitoring. And when that doesn't lead, we must be outdated technologically. So now technology has to be brought in a big way. And of course, now we are at this point, research and data is so important. It wasn't important earlier, but now it is. And sometimes in some places we do hear the notion that we have to develop institutions or school heads. This is not so common, but the first 7 are very commonly part of the cycle of growth of educational reformers who reach point 7 and then usually leave the field. Then the next one comes and starts on number 1 again. Now in the 90s to 2005, the big question really was, when I began working, I lived in a tribal village for 7 years, and the big question was, how do children learn? And I think in some time we understood how that happens. Then when we started teacher training, we realized, the problem is, but how do teachers learn? And I think that got sorted out quite well by 2015. But then the problem became, how does the education system learn? It persists in doing things the way it was doing in 1990s. If you go into government offices, if you observe them, you will not find them doing things dramatically different. They might just be doing it on a phone or instead of a file sheet, but the major action is not very different. So we have this 5G stage of reform. The work is not very different from 3G, 4G, even 1G. We are still talking of enrollment, retention, etc., etc. And interestingly, we have 18th century approaches still in practice everywhere. For example, this room, which is a higher education institution, is designed in such a way that one person will speak and everybody else will listen. Is that the vision of higher education we should be seeing in practice? It's 200 years old. The design itself reinforces a certain kind of pedagogy. So to my mind, this is not a great investment. We should not be surprised if the results are not very great. So if you are an educational reformer and you start working, what are some of the things you will discover? You'll find good things are there, like teachers are supposed to be appointed. We have 10 lakh missing teachers, but they are not appointed because there are court cases. There are other factors. In one state I've been working with, the curriculum development was held up because since elections are not that far away, a bureaucrat was appointed whose main job was essentially to collect money for the ruling party. And as a result, decisions were not taken, curriculum work was stopped. The system is always in a hurry. It wants things done yesterday. And of course, it wants a lot of credit. So if you have these two things you can give, you will get entry, definitely. But do not do things which disrupt hierarchy. Do not create teachers who start thinking for themselves. Do not create block education officers who tell a district person, but research does not support what you are saying. That person will be transferred, as has happened in Bihar and several other places. Suddenly, because this is a perpetual problem, I don't know if you have heard this saying, which is common in PWD departments, which is sadak kachi to naukri pakki. As long as the road is unbuilt, your job is secure. So a lot of people feed off the fact that things are not improving and they have been doing it for 30 years. If you look at teacher training modules that are produced in the state, and I have an archive, so I can say this is a fact. If I put in one single state, one on top of them, I get a pile which is 10 feet high. Then, of course, some new NGOs will come and say, we got a grant, we want to produce one more module. And the state will say yes, because people are happily occupied for some time. It doesn't matter that things don't happen down there. So we now have suddenly, and of course, we have educational companies, we have tech. So these are all random solutions which are in search of problems where they can insert themselves. When anybody approaches a system or a school or teachers and says, hey, why don't you do this? What you're actually doing is providing a solution to a problem which is not in the mind of the person concerned. That is called spam. Our system is overloaded with educational spam. And we might all be doing it without knowing it, because for us it is very important, but not necessarily from that perspective. If you get into curriculum or textbook, you are going to have massive contests. I got thrown out of the country because I did not allow scriptures into certain textbooks. And for 2 years, I had to work in other countries. I have friends who educated girls. They refused to get married at the age of 13. They were killed. Education is not this goody-goody, nice, clinical, simple thing. It's a life and death matter in a lot of ways, which we are not looking at. I can give you hundreds of examples. I'm not going there. But please just note that it is contested. It is riddled with conflicts. Things keep going back. For example, the word beneficiaries is now suddenly common again. Instead of rights holder, after right to education, duty bearers are no more duty bearers. They are providers. Interestingly, a lot of people who are asking teachers to do certain things cannot do it themselves. Have you tried teaching a classroom where different sets of children appear every day at different times in multiple languages, and you are asked to cover something which is supposed to take 1,000 hours, but you have only 400, when your own time is often taken away? Can you do it? Can you manage a set of schools for which the staff of the district education officer was designed in such a way that they would run 700 schools, but after 30 years, that same set of staff is running 3,500 schools? You can't visit them physically anywhere, anyhow. I went to a school in Kurukshetra, and the teacher said, I have 3 FLN programs running. In the morning, I do one agency's FLN. Afternoon, I do another agency's FLN. On Saturday, I do third agency's FLN. Do you think his children are going to learn FLN a lot? We have, since I'm unemployed, I can say a lot of things. And one of them is that a minister actually once told me, why are you madly running after educational quality? If every child gets well educated, who's going to clean your toilets? I've had district education officers tell me, if these children learn and study well, how will our children learn? I think it's important not to be naive. We have to know the beast we are dealing with. It's no good coming around saying, oh, big data, as if listening to data, people's is going to change. It's not going to happen that way. It has not happened. I did the first ever study in India in 1986 of class 6 students to find out if they can reach class 2 textbooks. They could not. We have been telling education secretaries the same thing for the last 40 years. And you can see the impact. There is no evidence that evidence works. Everybody's into, innovation. And I have, as I mentioned to you, an archive, and I cannot come across a single innovation that has not been done 15 times before. We need to get the basics in place. Is the teacher available? Is the teacher on time? Is there space to sit? Does the school run regularly? Is the textbook available? Can it be read? Can it be understood? Is the teacher allowed to do what he or she wants? Then you talk of other things. We change the curriculum. If we don't change the assessment, things don't change. We change the assessment, but you don't change the training, it doesn't change. So you change FLN, but you don't work on reading in class 5, 6, 7. You don't work on reading in maths. You don't work on reading in science. After some time, you're going to come around and say the same. Again, we are finding that it is not having any results. The problem with education is that it needs to be seen as an ecosystem where all the components are organically linked with each other. You cannot work on only one part of it. You have to change all of it, and that needs a different approach. So why does all of this happen? That's because our system has certain qualities which we tend to not look at or like not to look at. It's a very acquisitive system. It takes away children's time. It takes away your resources. It gives very little back in return. It's not a benign system. Oh. So Land Pritchett laments that India did well when the logistical aspect of enrollment was there, but it did not do well once the qualitative aspect was required because different processes are needed. That's a useful starting point, but that's not enough. You have to understand what has been happening over here. The big shift that happened in India was that till the 1980s, about 40% children were in school, and they were from better off sections of society broadly. But when expansion took place very rapidly, the 60% who came in, because we are nearly at 100%, were from those groups who traditionally never ever attended school. They were tribal children, girls from certain communities, working children, children with handicaps, disabilities. The class diversity increased dramatically. But our pedagogical response did not shift. We continued teaching as if all the children are the same. They will learn the same thing through the same method, the same approach, and achieve the same results. It's not going to happen. We created a design to fail situation and refused to address it. So this is one of the first things that happened that we did not look at. There's an accompanying aspect to this, that there is a sort of systemic blindness. I've referred to it later, but where the system refuses to see certain things. Like right now, 70% teachers in India teach more than one grade at one time. But have you ever heard of curriculum being designed keeping in mind that that is the normal situation? We only see monograde approaches. The second aspect is that, we forget why an education system exists. It does not exist for education. It exists for itself. It exists to perpetuate itself. If you get a bunch of district education officers or educational administrators together and you want to have a discussion with them about rules of travel allowance, you can get a 6-hour discussion. I've done this several times. But if you want to discuss with them why children are not learning after 15 minutes, they don't want to talk anymore about it. What matters to them? The education system supposedly exists to serve the needs of the children who come to it. But what it does, it says there's something wrong with you. You can't come regularly. You can't speak the language of the class. You don't have anybody to support you at home. You're not giving all the time you should. You're dumb. You're idiotic. You're mindless. You're poor. You're tribal. You don't belong to me. I don't. What it does is it takes a deficit view of everybody and it perpetuates hierarchies. In reality, if you spend time in a tribal area, you might find that a tribal child is enormously knowledgeable. I asked children, I used to go herding cattle with them. I asked them to name trees that have thorns. They could name 19 such trees. I asked the same question to MSc botany students in Delhi University. They could name 9 trees. They could show me a little hole in the earth somewhere and say there's a scorpion which is inside right now. This one, it's not inside it. And for all my university education, I couldn't figure out how they know. I'll tell you in lunchtime. So, what it does is that it focuses on the needs of the more powerful sections of society. The RTE has so many clauses, but only 2 of them got attention. One was the EWS, the other was the CCE, because they affected middle class children. But RTE also says learning will happen through activity, exploration, and project. Have you ever heard it being talked about? That's a law, it's not even a policy. What does accountability mean in our system? Pleasing those above us or donors. Nowadays, that is a bigger thing. Why are you doing it? Donor has said so. Do children need it? No. So overall, the design of the system is to exert control. As I mentioned, it is already blind to a number of. Try this. Go to the state project director and say, a lot of children do not learn in school because of discrimination. They will say, there's no discrimination in our schools. There's no caste discrimination, is what they will tell you. And of course, when you go to the field, then you will see it's not. So because it is so oriented to preserving hierarchy, it's very good at preserving anything which can, preventing anything which can disrupt that hierarchy. It has learned how to do this extremely well. So the system is command and control, as you all know. Orders, everything is based on orders. In a system which tells children must learn to think for themselves. There's a contradiction. Obedience is very important. Compliance, as you all know. A common anti-education statement you hear is, I was given orders and I was told to do this, so I did this. So there is no accountability in that particular situation. Now, we have referred to the idea of the guru. Padma mentioned a lot about this whole pedagogical shift, how the concept of guru runs in our blood. But the useful thing about the didactic approach we have is that it preserves hierarchy and social order. If teachers start giving children scope to think for themselves, you often hear, but they'll start talking a lot. If you say, why do you waste your time writing everybody's attendance? Can't the student mark their own attendance? It's a small thing. But if they mark it wrong, then? The whole idea is that anybody who shows any initiative is not exactly welcome. In CCE, many things went wrong, but one of them was that the formative assessment requires a very different approach compared to the summative one. In the summative one, you can hold children accountable to yourself. You exert hierarchy. But in the formative one, you are accountable to children because you have to know where they are and you have to take corrective action accordingly. It's you are assessing yourself. It doesn't happen. Success, wherever we have succeeded, it has led to serious conflicts. That's another story, another paper by itself. In Kerala, for example, on a single day, 500 resource persons were transferred. When Assam did extremely well, Dheer Jingran was transferred to a war zone, Kokrajhar. In Tamil Nadu, somebody did extremely well. An embezzlement case was put on that SPD. because he managed to get paper to print books on time. So nobody loves empowered teachers or empowered anybody except the top, which is why you see that there's a conflicting relationship between, let's say, Government of India and NCRT. NCRT is never allowed to behave autonomously. Right now, NCRT is not even aware of who's actually developing the NCF. There was a technical support group and the MHRD. When the moment, not moment, it took a few years when MHRD realized that actually the states value TSG people more, then they disempowered the TSG people, disbanded it, and brought in other kinds of groups of people. The state resource groups were created because the SCRTs were not able to fulfill their responsibilities of producing curriculum and textbooks on time, and money was lapsing. But over the years, you now find that the SCRTs have been able to reassert themselves, and SRGs are ex officio. So diet members are SCRT, not selected people who had proved their capability. You see this conflict between headmaster and SMC. In so many states, about textbooks, the conflict is who will print them, because that's where the money is. So in all this, do you think this whole idea of data will change somebody's mind is going to work? They haven't made up their mind because they had data. They made up their mind because they want that hierarchy. Your data is not going to challenge or question that. There's a concept of truth conditions. What do you believe is true? Maybe in the world, some places they believe that what evidence, logic, data shows is the truth. But in our case, truth depends on who is saying it. That's far more important than the evidence or logic and where it is said. So many things, people are killed because something was said on WhatsApp. So this idea that, we can get the system to listen, to think, bureaucrats are extremely good at using data conveniently. When it suits your purpose, it works very well. Lastly, in this whole thing, this one is a little complex to explain. But as you see, educational planning is all about providing inputs. So you fix, I will give 17 days of training to the teacher. But when your input is fixed, the outcome is always uneven. Somebody will do very well and somebody will not do well. But if, on the other hand, you want to fix the outcome, that every teacher will be seen to be implementing this extremely well for 50% of the time, that's the outcome I fixed, then your input has to be extremely flexible. That is very difficult because how do you plan for it? How do you budget for it? There are ways of doing it. This is a big shift that needs to happen. We all talk about outcome orientation. You cannot have outcome orientation if your inputs are already fixed beforehand. That needs to change with donors, that needs to change with government, but I'm not sure how far that is going to happen. It's also anti-hierarchical because then it makes you accountable for the outcomes, whereas when the input focus is there, then you are the giver and you are the one who's above the person you are giving it to. Systems are extremely good at absorbing change. Why? The reason why I give that analogy of giving up smoking. Lok Jumbish that I mentioned, it used to have teacher training program where teachers were only invited. They were never given an order to come. They would invite 800 people and 1,200 would turn up. And now, of course, there are many people who would never have heard of it. So major projects or successes do not continue. Fads of the time because they make you look good. For example, balanced approach to literacy, Finland or Shanghai practices. Teachers are extremely good at knowing what the trend is. There is actually a state where in the state office, there are cupboards with bundles of files tied up on top of the cupboard, tied in red. If you ask them, what is that? They say, oh, that is the previous government's programs. So I said, what do you do with them? They say, if that government comes back, then that will go in the main, and this will go up there. Teachers are really solid at knowing that they know that this collector is here for 2 years, this secretary is here for 1 year. So if they see somebody approaching, they'll say, hey, sit in group, sit in group. They'll take out one thing. They know that you have not really changed. You're doing it only for a little while. It's a fad. They're aware of that. Interestingly, one of the biggest con jobs is how this hierarchy has completely co-opted tech, ed tech. So, for example, the big problem in pedagogy always was that the source of learning was the teacher or the textbook. Source of learning was the teacher or the textbook. And when in tech, it remains the screen. The shift that is wanted is that the student doing something is the one who should actually change. So I've been asked to conclude, but sorry, I am not going to. This is going to take 10 minutes. We've been led to believe nicely that a system is an interlinked set of components designed to work synergistically to attain a common goal efficiently, effectively, etc. But what really is, system is a mindset. And if you don't see it like that, you can't change it. It's an internalized default way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. It's common across a large number of participants. Yes, it is difficult to distinguish from culture, but it's about the relationships. For example, every time if any of us talks differently to a teacher as compared to a state project director, we are also practicing the system. We have that internalized hierarchy and relationship, whereas the teacher is the one who's actually doing the real work. So all this is quite messy. There is no neat, you can draw diagrams and show arrows. Fortunately, that is not really how a system in practice is. It overlaps with caste, class, etc., etc. Many times you think something is not working because system is inefficient, but actually what is happening is that somebody's vested interest is getting damaged, and that is why it is not working. For example, in UP, they publish textbooks using 300 printers. And what they do is they keep the textbook for the next year ready with them. If you want to change the textbook, they buy a number of MLAs and make sure your textbook is not changed. So there are two systems. There is a stated system that we see, and there's a real system. Like all of us know about bribes, for example. In the stated system, things can be said. Maybe there is accountability, there isn't. But in the real system, there is a lot of accountability. So what can nudge the needle? All this is not to say that nothing can be done. All this is to say that pit ke humne bahut seekha. We have learned a lot after getting bashed up over the last 30, 35 years, and now the time has come to actually put it into practice. All this was preparatory. Take a 200-year perspective. Don't think only in 5 years. So one request to everyone, start with yourself. You are the system too. Don't forget. Every time you feel that, oh, the community is so nice, they have contributed to the school by giving a teacher, by doing work, you're condoning the idea that the poorest people must pool their most limited resources to contribute to a school, while the others who are rich can get everything just because they are paying for it. It's a problematic idea, isn't it? It's how good the system is at putting it inside us. The field, we think there is something called the field. The field is not some distant rural area. All of us are the field. We have it inside us. When we tell our child, you'll get poor marks if you don't study. When we view success in a certain way, we have that field in us. There have been any number of successes, some of them temporary, some have been much longer. Kerala, I just want to briefly mention, in the first ever countrywide survey, which at that time was called the Learning Achievement Survey, not NAS, Kerala was ranked 31. It was ranked below Bihar. And a lot of things happened there over 3 years, which made it come in the top three, and it's still there. So there are successes that have happened in India. I won't refer to them, but some lessons that we have learned from it. Do focus on, so a system is essentially the people working in the system and the manner in which they work together. If you get the opportunity to work with them, start by listening. I have a lot of data on this. For example, in Bangladesh, of listening workshops were systematically conducted where officials asked teachers only 4 questions. What do you do? What do you like doing? What do you find difficult? What should we do to make your life easier? At first, teachers would refuse to believe they really want to know that. Then they would let out all the steam. And finally, they would then answer these questions. But they would tell the officials, we never thought you are human beings. And the officials would also say, yeah, we also never thought you are human beings. We thought you're just teachers. But the interesting part, and the reason why I'm telling you this, is in about 10 days' time, almost all the teachers who participated would be seen to be doing something new in their classroom, which they were not doing before. They already knew, like India, they had been doing training 10 years, but they had not implemented anything. This is what shifted things. Tamil Nadu ABL program, all of you know about. I did a study involving thousands of teachers. Teachers said the reason why we are doing it is not because we like the pedagogy, but because people listened to us. They gave us the position of a human being. In 1986, a school engineer, an engineer designing school system said in Himachal, earlier we could fit only 18 children in this space. Now we have designed it so we can fit 23 children. And everybody was aghast that idea of a school is not to fit more children in. It's for other things. And that is when the idea came about that unless everybody has a common shared vision, what happens in a school? What are teachers doing? What are children doing? What do you hear over there? What do you see happening? If you do not have that, and unless it is evolved by people, unless it is owned by them, unless they connect with it emotionally, you can't see things happening in a system. And in fact, for several years, this was systematically done. It had very serious results. Even when right to education was introduced, all the states officials went through this. And it did have an effect, but other follow-up things were missing. Another very important input for people of this kind is to work on their beliefs and assumptions. Is a teacher a victim or a villain? Is mathematics a subject or a way of looking at the world? Children are naughty and must be kept in discipline. Do you agree? There are hundreds of such small things on which, when different people have different ideas and different answers, they cannot work together as a system. If you want them to come together, they need to share fundamental beliefs, assumptions, professional values, approaches to knowledge, subjects, and have a common frame of reference. Otherwise, you will see this kind of contestation. And when there's a common reference, then what happens is people are able to overcome hierarchy and realize that all of us are doing the same thing. In passing, I just want to mention that when people do this, they get a common set of objectives, and that is what drives change. It is not assessment that drives. Assessment only helps. When you have an objective and you know you are far from the objective, then yes, assessment helps. But if you don't have that objective, you can keep getting the same assessment again and again, and like we are doing, like Asar has been telling us every year. But if that objective is not there, it will not. From an implementation perspective, one important thing is to sequence change according to how teachers learn, how institutions learn, how resource persons learn. Use of performance indicators, yes. A very useful thing is to use the theory of small wins and implement what I'm calling a low interference approach. For example, people do meet at clusters. Can that become a little different? For those of you who are involved with capacity building, please develop thinking abilities. And to know that continuity comes from the second rung, leadership. It does not come from the top. Everybody is so focused on education secretaries, SPDs. That is not how continuity comes. This one is a little complicated, but I'll talk about the first one. If you're working on professional development and you focus only on competence, you will not see any change unless you also create enabling conditions. If a teacher does not have enough time, for example, when a teacher does start performing, if there is not enough supportive condition, again, you do not see change. So there's a whole cycle that has to go through. If you want children to learn, not only teachers have to change, but the CRCs, the BRCs, the diets, the SCRTs have to change, and they have to change more for that small bit of change to happen. System listens to the language of money in the form of annual work plan and budget. That's another important place to intervene. To go to scale, you will need codification, but it has to be contextualizable. You have to work on societal readiness. You will find parents coming and saying, why don't you beat my child? He's not going to learn. So if you want change to happen, you have to educate, work with society apart from systemic readiness. Lastly, just avoid being naive, please. We don't have the time for it. Success will bring conflict, a lot of it. You plan for it, generate it in a calibrated manner, and deal with it. Don't escape it. Otherwise, you will continue getting the inequitable system that we currently have. Lastly, no money back guarantees. Think, please make new mistakes. Don't make the ones we have already made. Thank you. Sorry to take so much.
I request Dr. John to please felicitate Mr. Shukla. In the interest of time, we can take questions in the end. Amira is there. Thank you.